Hello, hello. Da-da-da-da. I don't know what's causing that. I'm secretly a robot, and it's picking up my internal vibrations. Sound better? That sounds better, right? Yeah?
Ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
Erin Wohletz.
Okay. I'm going to turn on my timer. Okay. I guess then I will just briefly introduce myself to all of you. I'm Erin Wohletz. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada. And then I left when I graduated high school, went to the state school up north, which was Reno, Nevada. Lived there for about 7 years, got my BFA degree. After I graduated, me and some other alumni started a nonprofit printmaking space in Reno, Nevada called Leica Press, named after the first dog in space. And I worked there sort of teaching some like little community workshops and working on my own work. And then after about 1.5 years, I decided it was officially time to go to grad school and went through the application process and wound up in Knoxville, Tennessee, doing printmaking. And it was very small fish in a big pond, lots of students there. And I just graduated now about 1 year ago, and I'm still sort of living and working in Knoxville, which has been great. So the work that I'm going to show you today is all of the work from my exhibition, Two Friends, which can be found down at Northwest Art Center. I see some familiar faces. Hopefully those of you that I didn't see last night get a chance to go see the show. And now I'll talk about the work. So I describe my work as being a series of visual essays about my sort of struggles or battle with nonbinary queerness. And what I mean by that, I know it's kind of a complicated term, is I sort of think of like an XY axis, and if I have like gay, straight, and like male, female, just kind of like hanging out in the middle. And a lot of times it can be a quite confusing space to be in because on a day-to-day basis, my opinions on things can change really drastically. And I think there's a lot of discussion in the world right now about the validity of such identifications. And so I wanted to pose a question for myself, almost like a scientist, a hypothesis, for my thesis project, which was, am I or am I not a liar? And each work from the exhibition seeks to approach this debate from different angles, including history, family, deception, iconography, and things of that nature. I'll keep going along. And these prints were highly influenced by the history of naturalist prints, which was sort of, I like printmaking's history as being an educational art form and an art form that was about disseminating information to larger bodies of people for a cheaper price. And so I'm really influenced by those works. But also, I was thinking a lot about notebooks. And notebooks were really important to me because they were spaces in which, you know, you work through problems in your life, you work through problems in a class, but also I think a lot of sort of maybe subliminal information appears, little doodles, things like that. Things you're thinking about, maybe not in a serious way, but in your subconscious sort of comes to the forefront. And these first two works were about sort of starting the exhibition by talking about the first time that I sort of tried to come out, kind of bungled it a little bit. Didn't go as well as I wanted it to. And I was thinking a lot about that process of having to go through a large period of self-analysis and coming to realizations of yourself, but then maybe a different day you're feeling differently, and so you second guess yourself. But then at some point, you decide that you're going to make a leap and tell people in your life something very personal about yourself. And you don't really know how well or bad that's going to go. So this piece, I talked about it a little bit in the gallery yesterday, but you can see some of the process here. I wanted to create something that sort of had that inherent risk in the creation of the piece. So in order to be made, I had to do this graphite drawing, which was finished over the course of a couple months. And then the whole piece had to be put face down onto a slab of ink. And then the image is drawn in reverse on the back, which then the pressure transfers the ink to the front, if that makes sense. So you can see here the sort of layering process. This was after the first layer. And then that was after about 6 or 7 layers. So just rolling up in different colors, drawing on the back, and trying to create an image. The second set of works is about history. Specifically, I was really interested in Zeus and the mythology, Greek mythology, and the way that Zeus comes down to earth in the guise of a swan or an eagle to have his way with different men and women, and the ways in which I really see the eagle and the swan as being sort of gendered icons, whereas the swan is quite feminine. So to me, I think Leda and the Swan can be seen as a queer myth, even though oftentimes it's not thought of that way. And also, this brings me to Two Friends. The show is titled Two Friends because all of the work has a friend, or a companion piece as I call it, but also due to one of my favorite art historical trends of all time, which happened around the turn of the century, which was works like these entitled Two Friends. And I'm not sure why this happened, but there was a large body of work made by really well-regarded and famous artists like Toulouse-Lautrec and Egon Schiele that depicted two women in the stages of undress together, and all the paintings were titled just simply Two Friends. Just friends, nothing else going on, just hanging out. And a lot of this work was created in Mezzotint. This shows you some of the process of that, and I went over that in my demo for those of you that were able to see it. But the basic process is that you use this tool in the bottom left corner, which is called a rocker, to create a field of millions and millions of dots. And you can kind of see what the surface of that looks like up on top, really close. And then that image is scraped away and polished in order to create the highlights and the dark spots, if that makes sense. So this is the swan from the previous image in process of being drawn. Another thing that I thought you guys might like to see was how the images get layered up in printmaking. So in print, we have the opportunity to use a lot of processes and sort of layer images on top of each other. So with this work, I started with the Mezzotint layer, which is printed from a copper plate. And that was followed by a layer in lithography, which was drawn on stone. And that's the red images that you see here. And then another layer of lithography in sort of another brown color. And then I worked on a series of screen print layers. Those of you that have come in to help me in the studio might see that I tend to sort of move images around a lot during the making of a print. Sometimes things work out, sometimes they don't. And lots of different things were tried before I kind of came to the final image, which was this here. I think it's really important to sort of printmaking can sometimes be overly contrived because it requires so much planning in order to create an image. So I tried to leave myself as much wiggle room as I can to sort of change the composition as I go along, because I feel like I need that excitement. If I just knew the entire plan beforehand, I think that editioning would become exhausting because it's sort of only processing out a system that you've planned ahead of time. And also I wanted to show some alternative compositions that I worked on. Not everything that you plan out is good. Sometimes weird things happen. And there's the final piece. And then its companion piece is That Eagle, which is sort of in reference to an important art historical trend, which was the rape of Ganymede, which was these history paintings that were made around the Renaissance. And artists would depict, like Michelangelo here on the right, which is the story of Zeus coming down in the form of an eagle, taking off Ganymede up to his mountain to have his way with him. And a lot of queer artists at the time would use this as a way to sort of make a socially acceptable painting that had this sort of queer undertones. So that comes into play. My third chapter was sort of my self-portraiture chapter. As you can see, a lovely picture of myself. I was thinking a lot about, I guess, traditional images of artists that are sort of very perfected and buttoned down. And maybe the way in which sort of, I can try my best to do that, but the queerness seeps out anyway. There's a certain aura to it. The story that I was telling a lot was when I was in high school, I couldn't understand why no one was asking me out to any dances. And so I turned to one of my friends and I was like, no guy is asking me out to any dance. What's going on? And they were like, because everyone knows you're a lesbian. And I was like, what? Because I didn't even know myself, but I then realized that sort of all these people around me had already sort of made these assumptions about me based on the way I look. And the second piece is Liar, Liar. And this piece sort of harkens back to that initial argument of am I or am I not a liar? The idea being to make a piece where I'm saying yes, that I'm saying, yes, I am a liar, and what would that look like, and how would I make that counter argument to myself? And so I was thinking a lot about sort of second wave feminism. Is my desire, me saying that like I don't want to be a woman anymore, a rejection of traditionalist ideas of what being a woman is, or does it have to do with my body and how I feel in my body? And the image on the bottom comes from this piece, Saint Sebastian Tended by Saint Irene, which is probably my favorite painting of all time. And Saint Sebastian is a really important queer icon. And I was thinking about if I am not a queer person myself, then does that make me a queer adjacent figure? And in being queer adjacent and talking about queerness, would that make me, you know, someone, I think even then it's like, it's hard for other people to make an argument that I'm doing something evil. Like I'm still trying my best, I'm still in the story, I'm in the plot line, I'm still being a healing person. But this was, I think, one of the most sort of difficult pieces from the exhibition to sort of think about. I think, you know, as anyone, thinking about yourself as a liar is not an easy thing. And here's some images of sort of famous Saint Sebastians, one from Dürer. The next chapter was dedicated to my parents, which was a bit of a tough road to hoe, as probably a lot of you as young people know. I had some misgivings about the show. I thought it might not go over super well with my family. So to sort of start off the series, I decided that I wanted to make these works that were dedicated to each of my parents as sort of like, I called them my love letters to my family, where I was trying to say, you know, maybe this side of me is hard to understand, but I'm going to talk to you in a way that's like, here's something that we love together, and I'm going to show you why it's a queer thing. So I'll start with the robots, which was sort of, I was thinking about my childhood and like watching 80s era sci-fi with my dad and all those things that I love and being in Las Vegas and like, but also thinking about, you know, some funny puns, maybe some dad jokes of like, you know, robots are programmed with binary, but, and also, you know, robots I think are kind of interesting to think about because they are unsexed objects which have gender. Interesting thing to think about. And this piece, Green Thumb, was for my mom. And it was sort of thinking about, you know, being in the garden as a childhood, and I think gardening was something that we always shared together. But then using queer iconography. So the top two types of flowers, lilac and lavender, are traditionally given between women as signs of love between women. And on the bottom right, the hyacinthus and the green carnation for love between men. The next chapter was about evidence. I was thinking a lot about, as a queer person, often when we come out, we are asked to provide evidence of our queerness. And I was thinking about, you know, what does that look like? And I've had many friends who have waited until they have, say, a significant other, or they begin transitioning before they come out to people so they can be like, here is my proof. Here's the proof that I am what I say that I am. And I don't really have that. And so I was thinking, you know, what sort of the problems and foils of that situation, and maybe what does queer evidence look like to me? And I guess that comes in more into play in evidence. How could I describe like a memory or a feeling as like a piece of evidence? I wanted to show you this piece too, just to show an example of how I maybe do like quick sketches to try to figure out an artwork. Because many times you get to a certain stage in a piece and it becomes really difficult to take risks because you're worried about messing up something that you spent a lot of time on. One thing I like to do is just quick digital drawings. I do these actually just in Instagram in the stories with my finger. And it can really help you figure out where to put a color, where to put a piece, and it's easy to move things around without making, you know, large changes on your timed artwork. And then this is sort of another version of this evidence piece. I'm thinking more I'm going to make a series of these works about like queer evidence and what that means. Which brings me to Breeze, the final series that came from my thesis exhibition, and this grouping of work was about shame, which is a little bit difficult to talk about. It was sort of about the feelings of, embarrassment and shame that comes along with, growing up queer and trying to figure out your own sensibility. So that was this piece. And I was thinking a lot about sort of the surfaces around me, building. This one as well, running. Love to run from my problems for long periods of time. Which brings me to post-thesis work. So recently, things have made a big change in my life because I wasn't really fully out to my family until the thesis exhibition, and it was sort of a terrifying moment having them come down. I thought I was going to have like a panic attack, but things went better than expected, and now I'm sort of seeing my work in this new gaze where instead of being very directed at sort of explaining myself to my family, I feel more open, and I kind of want to just talk about non-binariness in general as opposed to being from this space of fear, maybe being more open. And the first piece that I made was Tin Man. It was sort of about all my friends keep trying to set me up on dates, and I'm just like, the Tin Man, I don't know. I feel a strong connection to him. Yeah, and then we can talk some about the small works. After working, I guess, on sort of large pieces where I was trying to put, there's like a big story behind every piece. As you guys probably know, that can get a little bit, emotionally taxing. So I was thinking about maybe simplifying my ideas down more into just single things. So this series was kind of about, I guess, gender. I'm really interested in the idea of like a bird, like the way that we talk about a woman as being a bird. And then, killing that femininity, I guess. And also Pinocchio, being a liar and also being a real boy. I wanted to talk more, these ones was about sort of thinking a lot about plaid as like lesbian iconography. I found out when I was in high school, it was one of the reasons that people thought I was lesbian was because I wore plaid. It's like, what a strange, who cares? And it's interesting that like a fabric tells people about your sexuality. I want to do more work with plaid. And then the hyacinthus is from another Greek mythological story where Apollo and Hyacinthus were in they were two good friends, sometimes depicted as friends, sometimes depicted as more than friends. And when Hyacinthus died, Apollo turned him into the hyacinth flower as a sign of devotion. And more Vegas iconography is coming into play. I think now that I've been away from Nevada for 4 years now, sort of starting to realize how strange of a place Vegas is, how weird of a place it is to grow up, and just sort of the way in which I always describe it as like adults decide that they want to get totally unhinged for a weekend, and so they go to Vegas, and there's this whole attitude of like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And so there's like this section of Vegas where everyone is losing their minds and doing crazy, reckless stuff. And then outside of it is like a super religious suburb where like in my high school, it was abstinence-only education and like all this stuff. And there's like this weird disparity happening there where you're driving to a school with abstinence-only education, and on the side of the road you see a strip club and a big billboard for a local brothel. It's like, there's something not connecting here. This series was sort of about the body and about femininity, and I think more and more I'm sort of coming to terms with existing in my own body, and thinking of my body as a shell comes up a lot in the work. I think that if I could describe gender dysphoria in any way, it's having this like really stark realization that your body is a shell and like wanting to be out of that shell. Yeah, that makes sense. And this final work, I talked about this a bit in the gallery, sort of the idea that I'm not gendered by the vocalization of my name, but I am gendered by the spelling of my name. And that sort of, there's an interesting thing where this like legally on paper, I am inevitably gendered. And I've noticed like now, even applying to jobs, it's like you always have to be, it's like male or female. You're like, okay. And that can be sort of a frustrating process to go through. Which I'm like, why does it matter that I'm applying to this job? Why do you care that I'm a man or a woman? I don't understand. And again, more sort of vintage Vegas iconography, sort of thinking about the Vegas of my childhood. It's changed a lot now, but sort of the icons that I can remember, these really graphic images. And the final component to the exhibition is the index, which I would highly encourage all of you to read if you get a chance. And the idea behind the index was sort of previously in bodies of work, I would make work that had two faces. So there was sort of the outward-facing symbology that I would tell my instructors and tell my parents and tell other people about. And then there would be this sort of inward-facing, like true meaning to the work that I would keep very close to my chest. And I would like, maybe my best friend, I would tell them about it. And that was it. And it was important to me with this exhibition to force myself to remove my ability to hide. Because I think if given the choice, I always choose to hide. And I needed to, I guess, force myself to come out, but in a way that I didn't have to tell every person. I could just put it on the wall and be like, come to my show and read this thing. And so the index contains definitions for all symbols which appear in the artwork, and it can be referenced at any point during the show. And the index defines symbols in a variety of different ways. So I was thinking about sort of the ways in which we sort of grow to understand an object. So we start with the top row, which is kind of hard to see in this image, but it's just sort of a basic cartoon image of the symbol. Thinking about the way that the first thing we do to understand something is usually that we see it, and we understand it on its most basic level. Then the second line, which is also hard to see, is a map of all the symbols connected to every symbol which they appear next to. So the idea that sort of you're defined by your relationships with others. The third row is what I call the societal dictionary, which is kind of like a Webster's dictionary definition of all the symbols. The fourth is my definition of all the work. Sorry about that. But with all references to queerness redacted. So the idea being, can you guys hear me okay? Everybody? Okay, perfect. With all references to queerness redacted out of it. The idea was sort of to write the true self and then be like, but I really am not excited about talking to people about these elements, so I'm going to cross them out. And these drawings which you see here come from sort of art historically queer images, but cropped so that you can only see sort of non-queer parts of them, or parts of them that could appear non-queer. And then the next row was the full and true accounting, which was difficult to write and very difficult to sort of, I created this piece right before the exhibition. It took a long time to sort of work myself up to making it, and that was definitely one of the hardest parts, is being in the show and like having people peering really close and like reading, kind of felt like people were reading my diary, but I think in many ways the index can explain myself better than I can if given the opportunity, if that makes sense. And then the final row is left blank, sort of leaving room for growth, leaving room to add additional things, leaving room for symbols to change in the future. And that is the end of my talk. But I can also show you, we had some talk yesterday that we might want to see old artwork. So I don't know if you're interested in seeing some trials and tribulations from the past. But I can pull up my website and show you guys about stuff. If it wants to load. Maybe I have mostly just, as probably a lot of you have done, once the artwork gets to be a certain age, you're just like, can't bear to have people see it. But this was some of the work that I was making before, where I'm talking about sort of these outward and inward facing sensibilities. So like this piece was about coming out, but I just told people it was about inner struggles. Some like pretty standard self-portraiture, thinking about the gaze. Do you guys have any questions? I'll keep pulling up artwork. Yes. This one. You could just calling me out from over there. I mean, it was just 2019. It was like only 2 years ago. The work has changed quite a bit, but, or I guess 3 years ago now. Time flies. I don't know. And it was interesting, I was making this work in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I think that inevitably changed my work. I mean, originally I was in Reno. We were 3.5 hours from San Francisco. There was definitely a different sensibility and understanding of queerness there as opposed to when I went to graduate school, especially since none of the tenured faculty were queer there. We had a lot of faculty. And so there was definitely a lot of people coming into my studio and being like, what define queer? And I would be like, where to begin? I don't know. So that probably played a lot into my thesis now that I'm thinking about it. This like having to be in the studio and like people asking me all these questions and asking me to define things and sort of realizing like, I have this understanding of something growing up as a millennial in this space, but maybe in other spaces there's like a much less of an understanding of these things. And maybe I have an opportunity as an artist to explain things in more detail. Questions?
I have a comment about, here we go. I have a comment about your show.
Okay.
And your index especially, because usually for shows, I'm less interested when I have to read, and I thought that would have been the case with the index. When I looked at that, I thought, oh yikes, that's daunting, that's a lot just to read through. But then when I went through it, I saw that it's a lot of repetition, so it's not like I'm reading new information all the time, but there's enough new with each different row that keeps me intrigued by like how it's changing. And then I love how it does act like a map for the rest of the show, all the other pieces. So I found myself going back and forth between reading whatever line corresponded with whatever piece somewhere else in the gallery. And I thought that was just so fun. So I think
glad it worked.
Yeah, well that's a really cool touch. And so I think your show is probably the most fun show that I've experienced and actually wanted to immerse myself into.
I think that's an interesting thing making me think of, and it might be because my best friend is a comics artist, but I was thinking a lot about sort of creating information that might be less palatable and then finding like a way to make it engaging or interesting. And it was interesting with the index thinking about that, where it is this like wall of text. And what does that mean to require the audience to like read this image? And then I realized I'm not requiring them to. I'm just giving the audience the opportunity. And in that, I think I actually find the audience that I care about, which is people that are intrigued enough to read this and try to decode what I'm talking about. Because I think that is like also an element of queerness that can be really tough for me, which is like, for me, it feels really personal. And it's like, I feel like it's one of the only identities where people like ask you what your sexual preference is like out the gate. And you're like, well, maybe that's personal and I don't want to talk about that all the time. So it's like difficult to be like putting that out there, but it's interesting for me to put it out there in a sense where it's like, okay, but if you care enough to spend time with something that I care about, then I care enough to tell you about me personally. Versus like, if you're gonna just walk through the gallery and spend 2 seconds on each piece, I don't need to tell you anything about myself. I can just let you go. But I'm glad to see, I saw a lot of people that were going back and forth from the index. You know, it's always nice when things work the way that you want them to. Anyone else? I don't bite. Only if you run at me, then I'll bite you.
Can I not use that? I can speak so loud. How long does it take you to create a piece?
So for the larger work for the thesis, I mean, different things take different amounts of time, but that one took a long time. This was not a great example. The reason is because this was the first piece that I made after my thesis exhibition, so I think inevitably, I don't know how many of you have had a show before, but there tends to be this, there's like a lot of buildup before the show, and then there's like this release, and I almost call it post-exhibition depression, where I feel like a lot of artists get this sort of like, you've been working towards this goal, and then you spend all this time on it. I can tell that that just turned off. And then you create a thing and you put it up on the world, and then, you know, a week later it's down and you're just sort of like, okay, where do I start now? And so I think sort of inevitably this piece took a really long time because I was thinking about where I wanted my work to go, what I wanted to change, you know, how I felt about sort of now being like out, you know, people started actually using they, them pronouns with me and things like that, and it was just sort of like, what does this space feel like? It's kind of a weird time. But the work in general, well, all of this work was created over a period of about 16 months. Yeah, about 16 months, about a year and a half. All of them, yeah, all of them together. No, not one each. No, I started sort of when I got back from being locked out of my studio due to the pandemic. That was when the work really started. So you can sort of think about what that timeline was like. And I knew going into my thesis project that I'm a really slow maker. I've been telling some people the story that when I had to do my thesis as an undergraduate, I did not plan well. And I found out the last month that I was in fact so tight on time that I realized I only was going to be able to sleep 2 out of every 3 days. And so every third day I would pull an all-nighter and not go home. So coming up to my graduate thesis, I decided I never ever want to do that again because it was terrible. And I made bad art and I felt bad and it was bad. And so I actually planned out, I was like, I'm going to make 12 pieces because I knew that would be about what would fill the gallery. I'm going to give myself 12 months, and that'll be a good time post for me where I can count the number of months and count the number of work and know whether I'm ahead or behind. But you know, some things happen fast. Like this piece, I made in 4 days. You know, this, which one? Evidence was really fast too. This I actually made right after I found out I got this exhibition. I remember I was talking to my thesis committee because I wasn't sure what the timing was going to be like, and I was like, how am I going to make like even more work on top of the thesis work? And my head of my thesis committee was like, well, what if you find like evidence of the creation of the work or ephemera related to the work? And I remember I was gathering this stuff from like all my archives and all my studio, and I had it laid out on my studio floor. And one of my studio mates came in and was just like upset. He was like, that's the best thing you've ever made. And I was like, what? I was like, I was just scrounging around in the garbage for 30 minutes. So even though these pieces were made over the course of a really long time, in fact, this little piece right here is from the first Mezzotint I ever made when I was an undergrad. Technically, the construction of the piece was done in like 2 days. So it can vary. There were definitely ones that took longer, like this piece took forever. Mainly just because I got really bored drawing eyes. So I would like do a day where I would draw 4 eyes and then come back to it like a few days later, do a couple more. They're all different, yeah. They're all my eye. I took a lot of really funny photo shoots. My camera was just absolutely filled with, you know, me doing this. That's a tough question. I always wish that we talked about this more in school. How do you sell artwork? And I think that is one of the really nice things about printmaking, and we were talking about this a bit earlier in the studio, was the ability to have 10 of an object, so that you can be exhibiting it, you can sell it to people, but you can still keep one. I think for me, I always had a really hard time letting go of my work. I would make something and someone would really like it and ask to buy it, and I'm almost like, oh, it's like this my thing. It was hard to let go of. And so printmaking really allowed me to do that. I mean,
too, when selling it.
it's kind of strange. I always just assume that the people that buy it are like me, I guess, and so that feels good. I'm like, if someone feels a really strong connection with it, that's awesome. But it is funny. I have an online web store with prints in it, and sometimes I'll get a notification on my phone of something sold, and I'll be like I've sold some things and sent them to Canada. I'm like, I've never seen this person before. I'm like, how did they know about me? I don't know. But it's cool when people like stuff. Yeah.
Could you continue with that and let us know how you share your work? So the web store is attached to your website. Do you use Instagram? Do you use
Yeah.
other social media to
I don't think
share
it's on
your
my.
work?
It's not on my website, but it is. The link on my Instagram is and I can pull it up. I just have a Big Cartel. I don't know if you. Big Cartel, Erin Wohletz. And I quite like Big Cartel because you don't pay a percentage of your sales. You pay a monthly fee, so it's $7 or $8 a month. And you get to have as many things on the website as you want. And it's really nice because on the back end, it has all these different statistics and ways for you to sort of customize things. And it's good to send you emails when you get orders, tell you exactly where they are. So it takes a lot of the sort of issue off of me. I think there's a free version if you have less than 5 products at a time, which is pretty great. I mean, for you guys just coming up, if you just want to sell one thing, I wonder if I can pull up the back end and show you guys. It's on my, yeah. So Instagram, I don't know, you guys probably know Instagram. On the bio, it allows you one linkable website. And so mine is, I'll log into this, you guys can see what the back end looks like. I know a couple printmakers that use this Big Cartel, but it's just linked on there. And then, I think most of the people that see my work these days is amazing to think about, but I think most of them see it on Instagram. And so I always sort of underneath prints, I'll be like, and you can buy this print if you would like. One of the nice things I think for printmakers too is you can set a number of products. So say this print, I can say I have 4 in stock, and then it will sell until it goes out, and then it'll switch to sold out. It's kind of great if you, as products, oh, this already got shipped. You just click shipped, save. But then, I can I'll come home and I'll be like, oh, someone bought kind of cool, they bought these 2 pieces together, pack them, ship them, where are they going? Showing this guy's information. Going to Texas. So it automatically because they pay through, I think it's a PayPal thing, so PayPal automatically sets tax based on where I live, which I think tricks people sometimes because Knoxville has kind of high sales tax. And I know you can add things for shipping, but I usually, just to create ease on myself, I just add a certain, usually I add $10, $15 to everything for my shipping. So I always say free shipping because I don't want to deal with calculating it all out. Yeah, the dashboard's kind of nice. You can show you all your past orders. It also shows you stuff like this is really funny where you can see 65 people looked at this piece and nobody bought it. So that can be a good sign that it's listed at too much money and you need to lower things. Have a sale. Or this one, 52.4. See, I know that one's doing more in a good price range. I don't know. This is new for me. I mean, this is all post-grad school stuff now that I'm trying to sell my work more efficiently because I don't know if you guys have these opportunities here in Minot, but as an undergraduate and a graduate student, we always had like a yearly print sale as part of the print department. And that was really easy. All I had to do was put my work in plastic and put a number on it, give it to the people on the sale, and then at the end of the sale, I would get cash. So it was really simple. Miss those days. Yeah. It's interesting to think about. Anyone have any questions about like professional practices, stuff like that? Do you guys all have websites? You want to learn about websites? You can see different things in here. Oh, another interesting resource on my website that you might be curious to find is this link right here that says "The Future is Queer." This is an online resource that I made during graduate school, which is an index. You know, I love an index. They come up all the time. And it's a directory. I asked all these queer printmakers to submit their work, and then they all have little, click on one. Where's the good one? This one. I really like this work. This work's really great. And it has their sort of information, their website, Instagram, artist statement. Some of them have bios too. And the idea was this would be a resource to find queer printmakers. Maybe you're like, I guess for me, I like moved to Knoxville and I went to graduate school there, and I was a little bit frustrated about the fact that there didn't end up being queer faculty. And I was like, well, also that's like kind of a hard thing to know, because not all queer people make work about being queer. So I was like, maybe if that's something that you're interested in, seeing what queer people are making, maybe whose work has nothing to do with queerness, like Jacob Taylor Gibson. You can read about what they're doing, you know, see what their path in life was, look at their work. I guess it was just a resource that I wanted, and so I made it. So if you're interested in looking at a bunch of queer art, it's a good place. I'm all the way at the bottom, because that's what happens with my last name. But there's some great stuff on here. Larson, really beautiful. Also, part of the idea of it was like I was really worried about like outing people, so I was like, you have to submit your work, and then anyone who submits, I'll put it on, but I'm not going to put someone on unless they send me stuff. So if you're interested in joining, you can go on here and it tells you how to join. It's really easy. Just send me stuff to my fun email, which is queerprintmaking@gmail.com. thefutureisqueer.com. The most graphic designy thing I ever made. Question? Anyone? Yeah? Yeah.
About like starting that?
Yeah, that was an interesting process. So we were helped a lot by the fact that in Reno, Nevada, there's this really good teen music space / gallery called the Holland Project. And so they helped us and allowed us to become a satellite of their nonprofit. And I actually think since I've left, they've become their own space, but I haven't talked to someone from there in a little while. But they kind of helped us along the process because they were already in town, and we weren't really competing with them. We were almost an addition to what they were doing. And it was sort of all about joining other groups. Like the building that we were in was a sort of storefront that was in Midtown. We shared the space with KWNK, which is like a community radio station, which allowed anyone who wanted to do a radio show to do a radio show, basically. And they were in the front. And then it was us doing our prints. And then in the back was a guitar amp repair. It was sort of an eclectic studio space. But yeah, we went through, I think the Holland Project helped them hire a lawyer to help with getting the, double NC3 status to be a nonprofit. And it's still up and running. I mean, obviously I moved to Tennessee, so I kind of had to be like, yeah, they're on your own now. But we also got helped a lot by the university. They donated an old broken press to us, and we sort of fixed it. I remember I took it to like a metal fabricator, the press bed, and I was like, can we make this? And the guy was really confused. He was like, what do you want it in, stainless steel? I was like, no, just something hard. But that actually turned out good. So, you know, we got a press for it. It was $50 to get the bed replaced. And we, you know, had this really cool thing with the surplus, which not all places have, but all the university's surplus went to this big warehouse downtown. And it was like one Saturday every month at 8 a.m. it opened up and you could get whatever you wanted. You didn't have to be part of the university or anything. It was always priced really low. But because of that, the university couldn't donate the press to us. It had to go to surplus. So we were all like camped out at like 6 a.m. We were like, someone's going to get the press that's not us. Of course, no one's going to take the press. But the university sold it to us for $100. Used to be able to get flat files and stuff from them too. Yeah, I think it's about that kind of stuff. You really need, at least for me, I needed like a lot of people around me because it can be so daunting to try to start by yourself. We even had help, like, I used to do, the Nevada Museum of Art did like these teen art nights. And they would invite Leica Press to go and do the demos for teen art night. And we like print bandanas or something. Yeah, people are really good about fundraising and helping us out. Plus, rent was cheap in Reno. I think there were like 8 of us in Leica Press, and we paid like $20 a month in rent. Like, why not start a nonprofit if we're each just paying $20 a month?
Well, we're coming to the end of our allotted time, and I'd like to thank Erin for speaking to us today, for visiting artists. So let's give them a hand. And if you have more questions,
I'll be
printing
upstairs.
in the studio, and student critiques at 4:20.
And student critiques, where I will come and crush
Thank you, everybody.
No. Thanks. Turn this off so I don't go to the bathroom with this on or some other horror.